Okay. This is October 19th.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October 19th Village Board meeting. If you could please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we get started with the agenda, we do have our regular public comment time. If anybody would like to share with the board, please come on up and tell us who you are. I'm not seeing a lot of movement. So let me move on to agenda item number 1. We have a presentation this evening by Rich Strout of Barton and LaJudas Engineers on the potassium ferrate pilot test at the Brandel Road well. Rich, thanks for coming to talk to the board tonight about the wells. Is that okay over there? And I will preface it with saying that Barton and LaJudas and Jeff and Larry and myself have met at different times about the wells and what's been going on since, I think, last year, I believe?
It's been, yeah, since last year.
Since last
Yeah.
year.
So, Jeff, if I missed something, just fill in. I just wanted to make sure everybody's up to speed on kind of why I'm here and what this is all about. So, back in 2022, the village got a hit on manganese in its well site. So, early 2000s, I actually forget exactly what year we did that, but we developed, basically decommissioned the water treatment plant up at the reservoir and developed the well site here on Brandel Road. So when we did that, we did all the water quality testing, and the iron and manganese levels were kind of borderline, acceptable. And we knew that over time, we had a discussion back at that time, that over time as the wells pumped, it's possible that those levels would come up. And it's been, again, a number of years, and that appears to be what's happened. So the level of manganese is above the maximum contamination level in the, accordance with the Department of Health regulations. So the bottom line is the Department of Health said you need to do something about that. So we got engaged back, last year and started doing some jar testing and looking at how would we treat it. So generally what you need to do is basically oxidize the manganese and the iron and create a particulate that you then filter out. So what we've been doing so far with the lower levels is sequestering it. You add a chemical that keeps it from oxidizing. It keeps it as a dissolved substance. So what we're going to do is say we don't want it to be dissolved. We want to create a particle and filter that particle out. The challenge out there is once you filter it, you have to backwash the filters. Like a conventional filter, you would backwash it. You don't really have any place to put that backwash water because the sewer doesn't go out there. So what we're looking at doing is trying to figure out a way that we can do it much more less expensively. We need to find a chemical that will effectively oxidize the manganese, which means quickly and create a good filterable particle. And then we want to try to filter it out with bag and cartridge filters. So that's the concept, and we need to prove that out. We've been looking at chemicals. So when we did the jar testing, we tried chlorine and some other chemicals, and basically they weren't all that effective. It took too long to oxidize the manganese. We did find a chemical called potassium ferrate that oxidizes the manganese very quickly. It creates a very nice particle. It's a chemical that's been around, but there's a new formulation of it that is not yet approved for drinking water treatment. It's not because it's a harmful chemical, it's just this formulation of it hasn't been approved. So the company is working on that. We've engaged with the health department. They're in favor, and the reason that we suggested that the village pursue this is it's a very stable chemical. It'll come in a granular form, use about 3 pounds a day, and it should be very effective and cost effective, we think. It'll be cost effective. So what we need to do is prove out this idea, right? We need to be able to pilot test using this chemical and then filtering it with bag and cartridge filters so we can figure out, is this gonna work? Is it gonna work effectively? If you have to, for example, throw away the bag filters a couple times a day, it's gonna be too expensive. If you can get a few days out of each one, it probably would work. And that's the kind of thing that we're gonna look at. How would we set up these filters? How effective is this gonna be? So that's the pilot test. So we've done this first stage of jar testing. This pilot test we'd be doing together with the University of Rhode Island, who's been doing research on this chemical. They have a trailer, basically, with all this equipment in it. They would come out for a couple of weeks, run this pilot test. We'll get the results, analyze it, and basically get back with the health department and determine, do we think this is a good way to go? So once we do this test, I'll be back in front of you saying, here's how it worked out. So that's the proposal that's in front of you. Most of the cost is in going to the University of Rhode Island. There's some fee in there for us to actually do our thing, putting it all together, getting with the health department and trying to get, their thoughts, and then getting back with you with a report. The next steps after this, assuming it actually all works out like we think it will and hope it will, would be to put a preliminary engineering report together to seek funding. So that would be the next step after this, once we get this pilot test done.
And a reminder to the board, the funding for this proposal, and this project, I should say, was one of the projects we listed for our COVID funding to take care of. So that was the one I listed when we had to pick projects, just so you know, that's where it would come from. Does anybody have questions for Rich on this?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Okay.
I guess I'm just reading about the pilot procedure itself. I guess when you're doing this pilot procedure, we're not actually gonna be putting that water into circulation, is that right?
No, you would not.
And is there any concern about the potassium ferrate ending up in the drinking water? Or is that stay solid and trapped in the filter?
So there'd only be about 3 pounds of it that would dissolve, and then there would be a chemical reaction with the manganese and the iron and the manganese. So there is no concern. It's actually going to be beneficial because it would help remove over time and the manganese that's already kind of floating in your distribution system.
But I'm saying that it's not like we have to worry about the potassium ferrate going into the water downstream?
No. Are you talking about during the pilot test?
No, if we actually go into operation? or-
No. If we go into operation, this will be, which is happening on a parallel track, this will be an approved chemical for water treatment by the National Science Foundation, the NSF. So the company is right now seeking NSF 61 certification for this chemical to be used as a drinking water treatment chemical.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's dependent.
And it's
on
really
the-
just, like I said, a different formulation of a chemical that's used in other ways. This formulation just doesn't have that certification yet.
Okay,
So you're just gonna have a caveat, once you have the Rhode Island have their paperwork or their paper associated with this, then they can have like some subset saying until approval of this.
Correct.
Yeah.
The health department, we've met with the health department a few times. They're aware of where this is in the whole process. They're supportive of moving forward. They see a lot of potential here, but they would not and could not approve it for use unless it has that NSF certification.
okay, so all we're doing now is approving a pilot study.
Correct.
And then collect all the information, and then we look at it again.
That's right. That's right.
What is the estimated timeframe for something like that?
So in anticipation of the potential for this board to say yes, we've been trying to organize this so it can be done this fall. The intent there would be get the pilot test done, get the results done, say by the end of the year, early next year, so that we know the direction. We can then work with you on the next step and get you ready for grant season in June. So that's our hope, is that we can be in a position where we'd have a preliminary engineering report setting the direction so that we can then apply for funding in June, which is when the CFA consolidated funding applications come
If
out.
this isn't yet approved?
That approval is being sought right now, so
What does that timeline look like roughly? for something like that to happen?
I can't tell you exactly what the timeline is. I know that the company is working diligently to get that done, but I don't know what their expected timeline is.
My
But
concern
they
would
know
be
our
grant
expected
money would be
timeline.
dependent on if this was even
Yeah.
approved for this use.
Yeah, and honestly, when we've discussed it a couple times, we don't have a lot of options right now because the option we had isn't working. So there would have to be another Plan B if this
Well,
doesn't.
So here's what I would see as a Plan B. There's two things we want to try to prove out, is how well does the oxidant work? And how well does that particulate filter out? So there's two steps that we need to
This
prove out.
sounds like, almost like pool flocculant, where it binds to whatever element is in there to create a filterable,
What it,
denser material that you can filter.
so
Am I
the
understanding that right?
manganese and the iron are generally dissolved in the ground, in the groundwater. When they come out and they hit air or chlorine or some other oxidant, they will turn into rust, basically. Manganese is a much darker rust, but it's similar, right? Just a particulate. What we've shown is the speed of that reaction with chlorine versus this chemical is different, right? This chemical it's very quick, which is important out there because you don't have a lot of piping, you don't have a lot of time to create this particle. And the size of the particle that it creates appears to be very filterable. So that's why we're looking at this chemical. Then the filter issue is really just, there's a lot of ways we can filter it out. We're trying to see if we can get it filtered out with something that's gonna be inexpensive for the village to build. These bag and cartridge, so if you've seen home filter systems where you have a little cartridge, some people have the cartridge on their well, or maybe even on their village water, I don't know. But you have a little cartridge, you might have a couple of them in series, it's something like that, but bigger, right? So it might be in a canister about this big, we probably have 2 or 3 trains of them, we might have different sizes, like 2 or 3 different sizes in series. Those are the things we're gonna try to figure out, and basically then project out, how much do we think this will cost you every year to run these and because these are throwaway filters. If not, it's a more expensive filter system. And you gotta figure out, then we'd have to figure out, what do we do with the backwash water? You don't just dump it on the ground, right? There's gotta be a lagoon or a pipe back to the sewer system or something like that. In terms of the chemical, if for some reason this doesn't get approved, or there's something that happens where it doesn't work in the pilot, which we're pretty confident the chemical will work in the pilot, we'd have to go to something like an ozone generator. And that, it's a piece of equipment that basically generates ozone on site. It's quite a bit more expensive, uses a lot more electricity. So that's where we're trying to avoid those things if we can. So that's what this pilot's really about, is we have this concept, we think it's gonna work, we have to prove it out.
And we're trying to get it, reason we wanted to meet tonight was also so the setup for the college could be maybe end of October, November, before we get to the real cold temperatures, so.
Right. Yeah, this trailer, we just don't
Yeah.
want to be in a freezing situation.
No.
The pilot test, just so you know, the pilot test will run probably at 1 gallon a minute, 1.5 gallons a minute, somewhere in that range. It's not a lot of water, so as we run that pilot, that finished water will just be dumped on the ground out there, which is fine, it's just treated water, but there's really it's not a large amount of water that's going to be treated in this pilot test.
I got one last question, this might be for Jeff, is, it sounds like we still have quite some time before we have a permanent solution. What are we doing in the meantime are we just not using this well, or we keep an eye on the manganese and turn it off when it gets too high?
So far, we haven't used that well in a year,
Okay,
and we have that option. We can turn it on, pump it to waste for an hour to clean out our manifold out there. But as soon as we do that, we have to send notifications out to everybody, so you're looking at 850 notifications.
okay. And are we worried that the other Brandel well would need something like this?
Both of them.
Okay.
They're combined.
This would serve both, so the two
Okay.
wells come into the same pipe in the well house,
Got it.
so either one could be run.
All right, I'm good, thanks.
Anybody else have questions? Okay, thanks, Rich.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
So one question. So
Oh, sure.
could you
Come
use,
back.
I'm sorry, could you use the other formulation of the potassium ferrate too, right? So was there an original formulation of that was approved? That's just like.
There's other formulations of that chemical that are like liquid, so they'd be delivered
Oh, I
in bulk
see.
tanks and things like that, which
It's
is
too
just
expensive.
kind of makes it impractical for this kind of use. Yeah. This would come in, ultimately, when they're in full production, in bags or buckets, and it's a granular
Yeah.
type formula, very stable. Okay?
Okay,
All
great,
right, sounds
thank
good.
you. So with that, I'm going to move to item number 2, the proposal we were discussing. So consider authorizing Mayor Denine to sign proposal for professional services not to exceed $20,000 with Barton and LaJudas Engineering for potassium ferrate pilot test at the Brandel Road well. Could I have a motion for that?
So moved.
John is first, second,
I'll second.
Tressa, and roll call, please.
Trustee Mitchellwitz?
In favor?
Trustee Ganance?
In favor.
Trustee Farrakhan?
In favor?
Trustee Scally?
In favor.
Mayor Denine?
In favor. So we're ready to go, I think, and we'll get that signed to you tomorrow, and we should be all set. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. I'm going to move to item number 3. And Allison, can I ask you to read the legal notice?
Yes. Notice of continuation of public hearing. Notice is hereby given that a public hearing will be continued before the village board for the Village of Altamont at the Village Community Room on the 19th day of October 2023 at 6:00 PM regarding the adoption of a proposed local law entitled Local Law to Permit the Keeping of Chickens in the Village of Altamont. The proposed local law would permit the keeping of chickens upon issuance of a permit from the Village of Altamont Building Department, establish minimum requirements for the design and size of chicken pens and runs, establish limits on the number of chickens that can be kept on the property, prohibit the keeping of roosters, impose minimum standards to ensure sanitary conditions, and require inspection by the village code enforcement officer. Interested persons are encouraged to attend the public hearing and submit comments for the village board's consideration. Copies of the proposed local law are available at the village clerk's office during normal business hours for the purpose of inspection or procurement by interested persons. Dated October 5th, 2023, Altamont, New York, by the order of the village board.
Thank you. So this is the part 2 of our public hearing. I don't know if there's anybody in the audience that wants to say something else. I think we had a lot of great comments at the last meeting. We have some written comments that were submitted as well. Is there anybody else that has something to add? I see no movement. Yeah, okay. Come on up.
I just want to follow up on section 5, the last time I was talking about 24/7 and access or whatever. Further down that paragraph, the only thing I was concerned about is the last sentence, allows such inspection without the necessity of prior notice. I just think that may be dangerous for anyone to just pop into somebody's backyard to look at it. Is that the intent?
No, he would have to come to the door and knock on the door to
Oh,
look at
okay.
something like he does.
Yeah, he can't just go in there.
Well, that's what I was
Yeah,
wondering.
yeah.
You know, I just figured you'd give somebody a heads up. I'll be over to,
And he always does, I think, with our other inspections. I mean, he generally does, or he'll knock
Okay.
on the door if it's something. Sometimes we have to give somebody a piece of paper, he'll go, knock on the door, see if they're there.
Okay.
But that's our general process always. So,
okay,
yeah.
good.
He's not just gonna pop in,
Well, I just,
like literally walk into someone's backyard on his own.
yeah, well, you
Yeah,
wouldn't.
he won't do that.
You wouldn't want to do that.
No.
I mean, you
No.
know. Because I used to have couple pretty big dogs back
Yeah.
there, and they're wandering around, so.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I brought
If
it up.
somebody has a rooster, though, and you give them 24 hours notice, I'm gonna go check and see if you have a rooster, then that just gives them 24 notice to hide it, so like Mayor said,
Oh,
show up
okay.
unannounced. and do
Yeah,
the inspection.
yeah, he will show
Not
up to
break
knock
into
on
your
the door.
backyard.
Exactly, he's not gonna break it, but he will show up
Okay.
and knock on the door sometimes if he has to,
Oh, okay.
But he's definitely will knock.
24 hours to hide it. Yeah, that's pretty good.
Not that I would do anything like that, I'm just saying.
Not you.
The other thing, the last thing I mentioned was the fee structure.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still looking at the 150,
Yes,
50?
yep,
Okay. And I noticed a lot of your regulations are similar to Guilderland and a lot of the other towns?
Yeah, our regulations were modeled after several municipalities from Voorheesville to Guilderland to New Scotland to Colony, and then Rotterdam had a lot of them as well, because they had a really well-written
Yeah.
model to look at. So
Okay.
we looked at, 5 or 6 different places.
All right, did you by chance ask any of them what their fee structure was?
They're all different. They're different all across New York State. A lot of times it's $25, sometimes it's $10, sometimes it's $100. It's been all over the place, depending.
Right, I'll just read off three.
Okay.
Voorheesville is 25 with a $25 annual fee. Guilderland is 50, no annual fee. Colony is 65, no annual fee. So my suggestion would be for the board maybe to look at just doing no annual fee and a lesser fee for the initial application.
Yeah.
I don't need an answer, just something for you to think about. Because it almost seems like at $50 a year, it's kind of like a chicken tax. Like, okay, it's going to cost you, it's 96 cents a week. It's basically almost $1 a week, And it just kind of, I don't know, if people want to have chickens or fowl and everything else, they pay the application. The $50 fee would certainly be the highest and of the surrounding areas. And I don't know, I think people just need a break,
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
And let's see if there's anybody else that has something to add. We're good? I don't see any movement. So at this time, could I have a motion to close the public hearing? Michelle's first and second.
I'll second.
Nick, second. Roll call, please.
Trustee Mitchellwitz?
In favor?
Trustee Ganance?
In favor.
Trustee Farrakhan?
In favor?
Trustee Scally?
In favor.
Mayor Denine?
In favor. So I'm going to move to item 4. Right now, review seeker for proposed local law number 1 of 2023. Allison, I'm going to turn to you on this if you don't mind, because people always ask kind of why are we doing seeker for maybe a zoning change, and you always have a good explanation for all this.
Well,
You say it so well.
it's a reasonable question. Why are we
Yeah.
doing seeker for a local law, regulating the keeping of chickens? But you did hit it right, Carrie, that because this local law actually does amend our use table in our zoning law, it's considered a local law affecting the use of land over 25 acres. So not only is it subject to seeker, we're considering it to be a type 1 action under seeker. So for a type 1 action, the law requires that we prepare a full environmental assessment form, which was done when the local law was introduced by the village board. Under the EAF form, where you have the only real action under consideration is the adoption of a local law, a lot of questions on the form just aren't applicable because you're not dealing with a specific project with a certain amount of disturbance or anything like that. So we completed the first section of the Part 1 and then attached a narrative to the full EAF explaining the local law and some of the relevant provisions. So when we get to Part 2 of the EAF, this is where the board identifies and assesses the potential for environmental impacts arising from the local law. I've prepared a draft of the Part 2 EAF, which is included within the agenda packet. And I'll quickly just give a review. I know the board members have all had a chance to review this and consider it. You'll see at the top, we have, impact on land, which is marked yes. So we mark that as yes because the local law is going to permit residents who do obtain the proper permit from the code enforcement officer to construct these pens or runs on their property. So there will be some minor disturbance of land arising from the development of the local law. People will apply for these permits. They will construct the pens in their backyard. But if you go through the questions under the, the actual impacts, these are all marked no or small impact.
Okay.
And then as you go through the rest of the form, many of these things, it just, not going to be applicable, or, it's just a small or no impact. And so that's, impacts to, groundwater and flooding and impacts on on air. I will note that we do have provisions in the local law that require certain minimum sanitary conditions. The storing of food, the handling of the manure, if that's the right word for it.
The chicken spoil.
Yes. Which will actually have a mitigating effect on potential impacts from odors, vermin, things that, typically could be associated with, the keeping of chickens. So, you'll see that, all of these questions, with the exception of the impact on land, which we already discussed, are marked, no impact. If the board is agreeable with these proposed responses, we can move on to consideration of Part 3 of the FEAF.
Has
And that's it.
everyone had a chance to review part 2 and are okay with the draft as written?
I think we missed number 8.
Number 8. Let me see.
Oh, yeah, that's not checked. Impact on agricultural resources.
Okay,
I got to turn back, sorry.
we did miss that. Impact on agricultural
Oh,
resources.
got it.
And we can, kind of talk that one through, and the board can, decide on a response. If you look at, kind of the sub-questions under here, I don't think that any of them you would mark as a moderate or large impact. We're not really affecting,
Yeah.
any soils classified as prime agricultural soils. This isn't going to, have the effect of, permanently converting, available agricultural lands. In fact, it's actually allowing and introducing a, arguably an agricultural use into sections of the village with the regulations that are built into the local
Okay.
law. So I would propose, if the board's agreeable, we could also mark number 8 as no impact, if the board members agree.
I do.
I'm agreeable.
He's agreeable.
I'm
so
agreeable.
Today I am.
We are agreeable.
Okay, so after consideration of Part 2 of the EAF, we move on to consideration of Part 3. And again, in your agenda packets, we do have a draft Part 3 of the EAF form prepared for the board, which has a reasoned elaboration supporting a determination of no significant impact, a negative declaration. This form, I can read it if the board would like, or just kind of give a summary. Essentially, it's just pointing out many of the mitigation measures that are incorporated in the local law. Just for example, it's limiting the number of pens or runs that can be kept on a piece of property, prohibits the keeping of roosters, which will mitigate, noise impacts. It imposes minimum standards to ensure the sanitary conditions, which we talked about, have mandatory inspections by the village code enforcement officer. And so for those reasons, and the reasons, as you go through Part 2 of the AF and nothing was marked, significant, the conclusion of this draft is that, there's no potential for significant adverse environmental impact under seeker. So if the board is agreeable with this determination, it can move on to, we've prepared a resolution that would formally adopt a negative declaration and take action on the proposed local law.
You guys good?
Okay.
The only thing I will ask about this is I thought I had sent it to everyone. I sent it to Allison and Patty. But the draft that you have in your packets, I had done the following after our last meeting, which was from the feedback that we all talked about and what people gave us through their public comment, that the word weatherized replaced the word insulated in section 3.3. The word sanitarily was removed from section 4.1 because it wasn't needed the way the sentence was put together. Remove the sentence scattering of food on the ground is prohibited in section 3.4 because the previous sentence makes this phrase unnecessary. The height was changed in the enclosures from 6 foot to 7 foot. That was a change that was supposed to be made prior to the first draft. I missed it when I typed it out. It was, again, somebody over 6 foot would have a hard time going in there to clean the enclosure if it's not tall enough for them. That was 3.3D. Those were the only changes. So for number 5, should I say something, because the original draft did come out, do I have to amend, say, consider approving the resolution, adopting, the negative declaration, and enacting the proposed local law, the amended, or like, how should I say that, the amended with those amendments in it?
Yes, it's still the proposed local
It's still the
law.
proposed, so it's okay, just, I
Yes,
mean, most of
and-
it was typo type stuff, but,
The changes were made through the village's board review process, some
Yeah.
things in response to comments that were
Okay.
made at the public hearing, identifying the typos in the local law, and
Okay.
also just changes that have been incorporated to improve the law. We had this discussion that I don't consider any of those changes to be substantive
Right.
changes, but the village actually did renotice the continuation of the public hearing and has continued it after those changes were made.
okay. So we can do it as is. Okay, everybody good with that? So item 5 is consider approving resolution adopting a negative declaration and enacting proposed local law number 1 of 2023 to permit the keeping of chickens in the village of Altamont. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
John is first and second.
I'll second.
Tressa is second. Roll call, please.
Trustee Matulowicz?
In favor.
Trustee Ganance?
In favor.
Trustee Farah?
In favor?
Trustee Scally?
In favor.
Mayor Denine.
In favor. And just there's the folks, some of the folks that helped us out, the board, besides Allison, who helped us immensely, but Kate Preventure, who's in our audience tonight, thank you very much, because you started with us on this committee about, 4 years ago. And you even, you helped this time too with your comments to the draft, so we appreciate your work. Thank you so much. Item 6 is consider a bid submitted by the town of Lenox in the amount of $90,000 for the purchase of E17 2001 Pierce Contender Engine Fire Truck as is per recommendation of Paul Miller, Fire Chief. Could I have a motion?
So moved?
And Nick is first and second.
I'll second it.
Michelle is second. And roll call, please.
Trustee Matulowicz?
In favor.
Trustee Ganance?
In favor.
Trustee Farah?
In favor?
Trustee Scally?
In favor.
Mayor Denine.
In favor. Item 7 is consider a motion to adjourn. Can I have a motion, please?
So,
Ooh, Tressa won that one. John, will you be second?
sounds good.
All right, John is second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? No. So we'd like to tell everybody that our next scheduled meeting is November 8th. It's on a Wednesday this time, 2023 at 6 o'clock. So same room, 6 o'clock time for that one as well. Thank you very much and have a great night.
Thank you.